So to your minds, is there any future of God that you could be comfortable with? A God, say, defined the way Deepak defines it.
Well, so he's sort of redefining it in his own particular way, in which everybody would have to agree. And then, I guess my point is, why hinge it to all the woo-woo stuff? Why hinge it to things that are just fuzzy words? We can actually get right down to understanding what's going on with things like compassion and emotion.
Science does not explain why we're here. It doesn't answer a lot of the big questions.
Oh, okay, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we can't at least try to understand. I mean, the whole point of science is to try to get down and drill in and figure out what's going on. So we can use words like, it'd be better if we were all compassionate and loving to one another and so on. Of course, who would disagree? But what we want to know as scientists is, well, how do you actually implement that? What are the sorts of things we can do that increase that in people? Well, we have to understand what's going on when somebody has affections for somebody else. So, for example, if you have an exchange with another human, a stranger, in which you give them something and they give you something back and it's a positive thing, there's a little spike in oxytocin. Oxytocin is an attachment hormone discovered with nursing mothers and then expanded to, it turns out anytime you touch somebody else, there's a little oxytocin there. So anything we can do to increase oxytocin is a good thing, and that makes people like each other. So there, I've not taken anything away from the beauty of love and the emotional appreciation, but we now have an understanding of the mechanics of it, and therefore you can structure some kind of social system in which there's more of that, not spraying it in the air, but actually having people exchange things in a positive way, like trade, increases oxytocin, and there's nothing wrong with knowing that. It doesn't take anything away from the story.
I'm not sure how I know this, but I think Deepak wants to say something.
Oxytocin is not love. Oxytocin is the measurement of love in a laboratory.
No.
Just like H2O,
No.
knowing the formula H2O is not the experience of water.
Deepak,
okay?
this experiment has been run.
I know it has been run. What does it prove, though?
The control is that you give oxytocin to people, and then they become
because
more
both
generous.
oxytocin and the experience of love are interdependent.
This is semantic.
It's not a causal relationship. Is not the same thing as correlation.
Deepak, there are different levels.
If I go to a picnic and there are ants all the time, that doesn't mean ants cause the picnic.
Okay, let me just explain the experiment. So, two people in a game set.
I know the experiment,
but
Michael.
Wait, I have to say it. Two people.
This is the kind of woo-woo you guys promote to prove your so-called science.
I don't know the experiment,
so let me tell the experiment. Yeah, let me tell you. Okay, so you have two people in an exchange game, and they make an offer to each other. And if it's fairly equitable and generous, they feel good about each other. You draw their blood, and there's a spike in oxytocin. Now, is that because oxytocin is the result of the positive interaction, or is it the cause? So the control was you give them a little, before the experiment, you give them a little hit of oxytocin with nose spray. It's done to induce labor in pregnant women. And Paul Zak did this research, and sure enough, any subjects that got a spike in oxytocin from the nose spray were more generous than those that didn't get the spike.
But if I said I love you and it meant something to you, you would also release oxytocin.
Yeah.
So does the thought create the molecule, or the molecule create the thought? Or are they simultaneous expressions of a deeper, transcendent reality that we are inseparable?
Ask him.
Can I just jump in here? Okay, well, I think we should wander off the specifics of oxytocin. He's just described an experiment where you can actually answer that question. If I give you a shot of oxytocin and it changes your level of trust, then it's not just mere correlation. I mean, we've run it both ways. And so
But
that's
I
what he
can
just described.
increase trust, and it can generate
yes,
oxytocin
okay,
too.
But if trust is just the brain in one state, then you have the brain influencing its future states. You haven't gotten out of the brain and got an ectoplasm.
Trust is the subjective experience of consciousness. Oxytocin is the objective experience of consciousness.
But what you seem to be expressing is a deeper skepticism about whether the brain is even involved.
No, the brain is involved. No, your consciousness likes brains to express itself.
Okay, but do you believe, for instance, do you believe that do we have souls, or that our mind is somehow independent of the brain, that will lift off the brain at death and go elsewhere? Is that
I believe there's a transcendent core consciousness that is comprised of meanings, context, relationships, archetypal ideas that recycles itself, just like everything else recycles
So
itself.
it's in no sense a product of the brain.
It's no sense a product of the brain, and our whole endeavor in spiritual discipline is to actually go beyond that personal consciousness, that ego consciousness, so we can identify with that transcendent reality, which is the source of space, time, energy, and everything else that exists.
Okay, well, let me just say a
No,
few
but
things.
I think the question is, are we encapsulated bags of skin dragging around a very little ego?
No,
Or are we
that isn't
organism
really the
environment
question.
symbiotic
You
with
can
fields
say
within
no to
fields
that.
and consciousness
See,
of life?
Sam,
Deepak, let me just, you put a lot on the table. So Deepak just said some very, seems a strange word to use, but some concrete things that science can criticize. Okay, you just said that consciousness and mind are...
I didn't say consciousness and mind. I said mind is a product of consciousness.
Okay, but this subjectivity is independent of the objectivity of the brain.
There is a subjectivity which is independent of objects. But there's a subjectivity which is subjectivity of itself. When you're looking at the brain for consciousness, you're not looking at consciousness. You're looking at synaptic firings. In fact, it is your consciousness that is looking at those synaptic firings.
All right. Let's just keep that in view. All right. Now, you've said there are two things that an incomplete science of consciousness and the mind should want to say about that. One is that having an experience of undivided consciousness does not tell you what consciousness really is or what its relationship to the brain really is. There's nothing about introspection that leads you to sense that your subjectivity is at all dependent or even related to voltage changes and chemical interactions going on inside your head. Okay, you can feel, you can drop acid, you can meditate for a year, you can do whatever you want to perturb your nervous system. You can feel yourself to be one with the universe, and at no point in that transformation do you get a glimpse that there's 100 trillion neurons in your head or synapses in your head that are doing anything.
It's called binding.
No, it's not. It's called absolute subjective ignorance of what's actually going on outside your consciousness.
You're you're so
Deepak,
you're so dismissive of subjective experience.
I'm not remotely dismissive of it.
To poetry, to music, to art. So dismissive of subjectivity. I'm saying that the whole universe is imbued with subjectivity.
There's nothing more important than subjectivity. It's all we could possibly care about. The fabric of our experience, the changes in our conscious experience, are all we care about. And they have some relation to the physical universe.
Absolutely.
Okay, now the question is...
They give rise to the physical universe.
Okay, that is a statement of metaphysics that is totally unjustified and cannot possibly be justified.
That's why it's a statement of metaphysics, not of physics.
No, metaphysical statements also have to be justified, as it turns out.
Metaphysics statements come from subjective experiences.
All right, you're starting to lose me a little bit. I've let it go, but let's rein it back in. I'm just curious with you tonight. I tried to go down this road with you before, but you didn't really bite, so I'm going to try it again. Are you, I think the question that a lot of people have for guys like you, atheists, agnostics, is, are you comfortable with you must be therefore comfortable with not knowing the answers to big questions, or you have some sort of confidence that there is nothing more that most other people don't have?
Well, twofold. One, yes, by temperament, I'm comfortable not knowing the big answers to the big questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. And just live with it. Believe it or not, that's okay. And
you believe that when Deepak comes up with theories that you would call woo-woo, that he is just simply at his core, whether he knows it or not, uncomfortable not knowing?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think he likes to layer on the language of science because it seems to ground it in something a little more concrete than just woo. And what we're saying here is that you don't need to do that. You don't need to hinge it to all this jargon, because values like love and tolerance for differences and expanding the circle of sentiments to include more people, Those are values that stand in and of themselves, because people have value as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. And that's an Enlightenment value that's derived from scientific and reason and rational principles for the last 500 years. And you don't have to take all of that layer and put it on there that most people wouldn't understand anyway, and it just confuses things.